Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Roy Moore from the Fairplay For All Foundation. As kindly introduced by Andrew, it's the biggest dump site in the Philippines, one of the largest and poorest slums in the community. Talking about expressing yourself in a community like this can be a different kind of process. Lovely. So what I'll be talking about today is in terms of how communities can express themselves in all facets of life. When you live in a slum, when you live in a community like this, you quickly realize that you don't have any of the answers. The people around you do. And between the community, they share the key to changing the situation. They don't have always the means, but they have the knowledge to do it. Thank you. So there's a quick couple of pictures of Payatas itself, the dump site, and the trash itself. Lovely. So if you dump trash in Manila, most of the time this is where it'll end up. Scavengers like this woman stop up to a third of trash reaching the dump site. And so you can clearly see it's a poor family, a poor community. There's a fantastic quote by Dom Helder Camara about if I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. If I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. I'm not here to discuss the politics of anything at this point. But it's the idea that we have to scratch beyond the surface, understand what's going on, to truly understand how to change things. If poverty was easy to solve, we would have solved it by now. And part of that is in terms of expressing yourself. This is a boy called John Dale. His family kind of sum up the holistic nature of the problem. John Dale's mother was 12 when she was first pregnant with him. She had 2 more boys before she died of a heart attack at 19. It's like, who dies of a heart attack at 19? But that's the stress, that's the environment in Payatas. So the 3 boys are looked after by their grandparents, who have been 64 and 67 for the last 5 years. Basically, they don't know how old they are. And a lot of kids don't have birth certificates either. There's a whole problem behind it, and part of that is the lack of involvement in society generally. Payatas is a community, like many slums, cut off from the rest of the world. The part of the problem there is that the stress of poverty itself, in some research, has been linked to a drop of 13 IQ points. To put that into a more practical measurement, it's the equivalent of going an entire night without sleep and living your entire life as if you hadn't slept the night before, as if you pulled an all-nighter. I know how grouchy, how moody I am after a night without sleep, and I'm sure many of us are. So imagine the type of decision-making you're having within that. So when we start talking about solutions, the first one that I'll discuss here is about true democracy. This is the original idea of democracy, of people ruling, demoskratos, directly involved in the community. The problem in that sense is that a lot of people aren't involved in the community as much. They're not having any representation. They're not able, in the syntax of this conversation, to express themselves. Of course, it was only possible with small populations. It wasn't, you didn't vote for a representative. You voted for the ideas, for the things you wanted to do yourself. The modern idea of democracy came about in the early 1900s. Edward Bernays, the nephew of Freud, is responsible for selling that idea, for selling the idea of this. He was, to give a bit of context, he was the guy behind changing the culture in the US of where women couldn't smoke before. It was a real taboo, and he marketed it as torches of freedom with the suffragette movement, and it became acceptable now. He was hired by a bacon company to increase sales. So he was really cheeky about this. Got 2 studies, one asking doctors if they thought a hearty breakfast was good for you, the other asking the doctors if bacon could be a part of a hearty breakfast, put them together, as the doctors obviously said yes to both, and said, oh, doctors say that bacon is a part of your healthy breakfast, hearty breakfast for the day. So you can see the sort of ideas that are being discussed there, the cheekiness involved in that. And he was really responsible for the idea of modern democracy. But what I want to talk about, linking it back to Payatas, you might be thinking, well, what's this got to do with the idea of express yourself or in the fantastic facilities that BSM have gladly, very kindly invited me for? It's about education. Education is obviously one big part of that, and getting the community involved in Payatas, one of the things we do at the Fairplay For All Foundation is work towards democratic education. This is where, if you imagine a school where the students are part of the decision-making, they're voting on what's going on within their schools, they decide which lessons they go to. It's not compulsory attendance for anything. The teachers are able to teach what they want, and the students are able to learn what they want. Some people think it's obviously dangerous, it's a risk. I'm not going to say that there's no risk involved. It's quite an innovative but also challenging environment. But it already exists. These are ideas that aren't new. Summerhill, the pictures that these are from, is almost 100 years old. They're not new ideas. But the basis for this comes from the idea that, well, in politics, we spend so much money on finding out what voters are thinking, to understand voters. In business, we spend so much money trying to understand what consumers, customers want. But in education, despite spending in the Philippines over 400 billion pesos on the education system, we're not trying to understand how students learn and what's going on for them. We're not empowering students. And part of that, within the community of Payatas, means that they're left behind. Only the top 1 or 2, 3, 4 students in the current system have any chance of breaking that cycle of poverty. And again, in the syntax of this TEDx event, they have no opportunity to express themselves. So in the Philippines, it's particularly relevant because half of grade 1 students will drop out at some point. Half of grade 1 students in the country won't finish their education. Classrooms are obviously very overcrowded, 60 to 80 students on average in Payatas. The latest research isn't being taken into account, things like emotional intelligence, things like the Lazada line, which shows how much positive experiences are so necessary for a productive environment, whether that's in work, education, politics, whatever environment that is. You need 3 positive experiences to every 1 negative experience in order to have a productive environment in whatever setting. For the kids, for example, they're used to being told from a very early age that they're failures. They failed in school because they didn't learn to read by the age of 6 or 7. Whatever the circumstances, no matter how much they have to work at home scavenging themselves or getting involved in whatever else there is, they're branded as failures. There's also a lot of corporal punishment in these public schools in our area. The kids are used to being verbally and physically hit if they give the wrong answers. So it's no surprise that they're wary of school, that they have such negative attachments to it. And that's, of course, not to degrade the hard-working people involved in that, or teachers themselves, of course. Teachers didn't get involved in the system to give standardized tests to 6-year-olds. It's something that's developed since then. It's something that shows how things have developed and now work. But it's not how it has to be. So this is a gratitude galaxy that we have at the Fairplay Centre. Every day the kids post what they're grateful for. It's part of the happiness advantage, a fantastic piece of research with Sean Aker. He had a really good TED Talk as well, I encourage you to find out about, showing that happiness isn't just an airy-fairy concept of what's going on. It contributes massively to your productivity in whatever field. And also Carol Dweck with the mindset, growth mindset, and a lot of different researches which together show that the way that school is done for most of our kids doesn't work. More than half of the kids are dropping out and we're spending hundreds and hundreds of billion pesos a year. Something has to change. And in our view, that's a choice. Giving choice to the kids, giving choice to the teachers involved. Bureaucrats don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of education philosophy and how it works. Teachers, students do, because they're there every day. They're understanding their own environment better than anyone else. And as with the beginning with Payatas, the people there understand that better than anyone with a degree in community development or philosophy, politics, whatever course there is. It's through experience that we learn and understand. So an example of that is one of our other projects with football. We started a football program to base ourselves in the community, to develop things, to be known, to build trust, because it takes a lot of time to build trust with communities used to these negative experiences. Within 2 years, one of our girls was called up for the national youth team after not being able to kick a ball. When you have a level playing field, they show so much potential in everything that's being done. This was at the Pinay in Action tournament, 3 versus 3, and these are from the Street Chow World Cup in Rio de Janeiro in 2014. As part of the Street Chow World Cup, we organized Team Philippines, which was street kids, former street kids who used to work or sleep on the streets across the country to take part. The Philippines obviously isn't very known for football. Basketball mad country, despite average height being, 5'5" maybe. And football makes a lot of sense. And the girls did fantastically well. They reached the final, so they finished second overall, winning the silver in that competition, against countries where football obviously is the #1 sport, as most in the world. But jumping back to the centre, If you can do this in football, you learn through playing. You don't take a baby and put them in a classroom and lecture them all day on how to speak. How we learn is based on far more naturally. We pick it up as we go along, trial and error. We can't tell a baby that they're failing because they couldn't pronounce daddy or mummy properly. It takes patience, it takes development, time and trust between the community. And so with the theme of expressing yourself, this is where we come to with the democratic school that we're building in Payatas. The community, the kids are used to having no voice. The families are used to having no voice at all. They're not used to being able to express themselves. Whereas when you build the community, when you're able to give people a voice, you see how passionate, excited, and interesting they are. You see that they have the solutions to the problems we're talking about. So every Friday, our full-time kids meet, and that's where they discuss the different rules, the different ideas they have with the center, and together they vote on what's going to happen next. Obviously, we don't let them vote on the finances or the budgeting or anything like that. That's not on the table, but everything else is. That shows the progress of the center itself throughout the years. So in 2011, we lived in what we affectionately call the crap hole up north, at the top of the road. We started with zero budget, trying out the ideas, get to know the community, find out what works. 2013, we were very kindly provided the funding to be able to build a drop-in center, a much bigger, able one. And by 2015, we now have the facilities, thanks to the Silver Star Century Group, to be able to develop the first democratic school in the Philippines. It's been fantastic progress. But of course, I'm not saying this is for everyone. If we're saying that everyone should be able to choose what type of learning they encounter, they know best what fits them, and teachers know best how to teach the students, then of course we should have different options. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all policy, which is why, of course, we can't say this is a one-size-fits-all policy. There should be options. But what kind of sums up the differences within that? Two of our girls there, the girl at the very front, she's called Jessie. Jessie dropped out of school in grade 2. The only thing she could write was her name. So after 2 years of strict education all the way through, she was failed. There's no way that anything that she'd taken part in there that she'd remembered, learned, or developed along the way. It's such an inefficient way to teach in that respect, based on the results. Jessie was a very scared child. She'd back out, she'd observe, she'd be very wary about what's going on. Because of course, from day one, she's told she's a failure because she's not as good as the rest of the students in the class. She's reprimanded verbally and physically when she makes mistakes in the classroom, so she's scared to take chances. There's a great piece of research come out through Harvard that psychological safety is the #1 thing for productivity in any environment, working environment, the school environment, any community environment. Meaning that beyond talent, beyond the relationships between everyone, the psychological safety, being able to take risks and not being chastised for that if you fail, is the #1 important thing in any relationship. And so when she first came to the center, that's the signs she exhibited. Same with Daphne at the top there. Over time, being trusted, being given an environment where she was free to explore herself, explore the surroundings, explore what's going on, she gradually learned to love learning again. She realized that learning wasn't something that a teacher shouted at her all day. It was something that she could explore and discover for herself. And that was fantastic to see. So it frees up the teachers because, of course, they're hemmed in by a lot of bureaucratic rules across the world. You're freed up from so many different things. And that gives the chance for Jessie to learn properly. So now she's writing, she's reading, she's developed in so much academically, but more importantly, her self-esteem and confidence has developed so much. So if she has this platform of emotional intelligence, if she's able to express herself freely without concern of being reprimanded just for expressing herself, then she's free to learn, she's free to discover, she's free to explore. The same is true of Daphne. She dropped out in grade 3 and has basically the same story in that respect. So what we hope the Fairplay Center does is provide kids from these backgrounds an opportunity to express themselves. Because when you give that opportunity, you're able to see that they have the answers. They have the solutions to what you're looking for. The poor aren't the problem, they're the solution. For any problem we face in society, there is an answer there. But it's structural. We have to understand we can't blame an individual for those circumstances. As I said before, if you remember the last time you had an all-nighter, the decisions you were making the next day, it's about the situation. Something that has to keep you going as well, no matter how much bad news there is, there's always some good news out there. There's always someone doing something innovative, someone doing something interesting, someone who can teach you so much more and you learn from. But lastly and most importantly, especially in the context here, is that solving the problem is also cheaper than ignoring it. We're spending over 400 billion pesos in the Philippines on education, on the system here. In the UK, it's obviously a lot more. In the US, even more. There's so much money going into the education system, but it's failing so many students because of the way it's being done. There are some fantastic teachers out there, some fantastic schools, some fantastic classrooms. We're lucky to be in BSM, which has amazing facilities, and the student-led organization. It's fantastic, but that's not the norm. That's what we don't normally see. Instead, solving problems, the social problems we see, by developing the community, by providing assistance so they can express themselves, to solve problems like homelessness, the refugee crisis, in this case education, is actually cheaper than all of the costs added up of ignoring it. Ignoring homelessness, ignoring the refugee crisis, the amount of money governments spend on it, and in this case education. Instead of the 20,000 pesos it takes to provide a uniform for a child, the pamasahe, the project materials, and everything else along there, plus the teacher's salary, the building itself, state-of-the-art facilities in a lot of government schools, it costs about 20,000 pesos the entire year in a community-run facility to learn 3 times as much. For a lot of kids, this is such a great solution. It's not for everyone, of course, but the answers are clear, the answers are there, and by solving the problem, we can do a lot more. And part of that answer, the core of that development, is in allowing people to express themselves, not going to a community thinking you obviously have the answers, being a typical white guy going to communities and saying this is how you have to do everything. It's impossible to affect change that way. But if we allow people to express themselves, if we build up the community so they have that safety, so that they're able to take risks, to deal with the consequences of that, and to explore the community and themselves, so much change can happen. So thank you to the organizers for inviting me here today. It's been a pleasure to speak and share a little bit in front of you. I hope there's something interesting that you might want to talk about and discuss later on, because there are some beautiful ideas involved in all of that. So enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you.